Well, welcome everyone. It looks like we have right now a few people in the audience. Welcome to 5 Digital Policy Targets. We're talking about how to close services and engagement gaps for long-term change in cities. And I'd like to introduce my esteemed panel. Myself, I'm Mylene Garcia. I'm the Digital Director for the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm going to leave it to my panelists to do quick introductions about themselves, and I'll kick it off to Tiffany, who works at our sister center at Johns Hopkins University, and rotate through the panelists. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Davis. I'm the Deputy Director at the Center for Government Excellence at Johns Hopkins University. We're essentially a training and education center for mayors and executive teams to really help them advance their data practices, from data management to performance management and all things data use. I lead a team of senior advisors and practice managers who do a lot of that technical assistance and service delivery work. So I'm really excited to be a part of the panel. Thanks, Melanie. Kick it over to Eduardo.
Hey everybody, and thanks so much for the invitation. My name is Eduardo Clark. I am General Director for Digital Government in the Mexico City government. I am part of Mexico City's Digital Innovation Agency, which you will hear about in the coming minutes. And I'll let the slides talk about our role next, but thanks so much for the invitation.
Last but not least, Bruno, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Bruno Avila. I am currently the I-Team Director in Amsterdam, taking care of the project Digital Urban Planning. I have a background in urban planning, but I also work in government and innovation technology in the last years. And I'm very happy to be in this panel. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Before we kick it off, I want to just get started by also just introducing the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation. So the center at Johns Hopkins University, we pulled together this panel. We're working to advance public sector innovation in cities around the globe. We're working together to marry cutting-edge practice and world-class research, and our mission is really to change the culture of government, deliver better results for communities. And we have core activities around technical assistance, collaborating with new people in City Hall, training those folks like many of my colleagues here who lead teams, by and for and with recovering bureaucrats like myself, and providing grants to support city innovation teams, digital services, and programs across the globe. So with that, we will go ahead and kick it off to the first sort of topic of conversation. To frame up the conversation here is that, we're going to talk about many different pieces of legislation. Our panelists are really here because they're selected around different levers that you can use to enact change. One is really codified legislation. So Eduardo will talk about that in a few minutes. But there are cities like Mexico City and Reykjavik that have localized legislation where elected bodies and officials are granting authorities to digital services agencies. And we'll talk about that. There are things that are obviously happening at the national level, but at the municipal level, these are important things that sort of facilitate and enable our work. Namely, you've heard of the American Recovery Act, which is federal and has some implications for the United States. The EU Digital Services Act, which is also really talking about codified legislation in the private sector. What we're really talking about today is the change, again, that we're enacting in cities by elected bodies. And so we have some examples of that. And that is a policy lever that can be used widely. The second piece here is really this intersection of policy and process. So how can you marry good legislative policy with actual in the ground practice and governance? And that's, I think, where Tiffany is going to come in and really talk about some open data examples there and how we've been able to marry both of those two things. The third thing that we'll talk about is internal policy, that I'm calling it. And it's really policy that is enacted by an operations manager or somebody that is impacting process. This usually takes the form of memorandums and other things that can sort of guide work across the organization that does not require an act of Congress or a legislative body or a city council. And then finally, I think what's really interesting here is the fourth lever that we'll talk about. An example is how digital and digital policymaking can actually impact future policy and plans. And that's where Bruno will come in and kind of talk about that lever specifically. So with that, I'll talk about this in brief and then really turn it over to Eduardo. But really here we're talking about establishing a digital authority. So when we talk about sort of formal legislative changes, how are we using policy and legislative policy to establish authority to consolidate existing technical resources as it's happened in Mexico City. And maybe with that, Eduardo, you can talk to some of these points about your story, which is both interesting, sometimes humorous, among many things, but I think you have a good one.
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks so much for that intro. So as I was saying in the introduction, I'm Eduardo. I work in Mexico City's Digital Innovation Agency. We are an agency within Mexico City government that is dependent directly on the mayor's office, that was created at a level similar to a secretary or a department at the beginning of the administration. And the reason I think mailing kind of puts us to talk about establishing a digital authority is because we are very lucky to be one of the most formalized institutions in terms of digital mandate for implementing transformations in a digital sense within a city. And let me talk to you a little bit about how that came to happen. In the previous administration here in Mexico City and many things that we see around the world, sometimes digital innovation places, labs, authorities are kind of like this experimental thing. And they're kind of far away from where the actual action of government happens and kind of far away from where the sausages get made in terms of the actual services that most people use day to day. And that is kind of a model that we saw happen in Mexico City, and it was very underwhelming, but because while there was a lot of maybe public communication about digital innovation, we really didn't feel like there was much end product and scale to happen. And what we decided to do since the beginning was to actually create an agency that was as robust as another department, be it the mobility department, the public safety department, the police office, the things that are considered day-to-day normal in a traditional sense, part of a local government. And we believe that digital authorities have to have that mandate if they want to implement change at scale. So what we decided to do was build the secretary level institution in which I'm a part of. And to actually build that, we had to do maybe the most important thing, which is having a legal mandate that allows us to implement the things that we need to do, be it digital government, procedure simplification, all the way to other things such as open government and open data. What we decided to do was build a law that gave us formal attributions to establish a city level digital agenda that was actually promoted by local Congress. So instead of being based on goodwill or good faith of the mayor, we actually have some legal attributions. And one of the things that maybe Mei-Ling was talking about when she said it was a bit humorous was that one of the things that is very particular about Mexico City is that we were built right at the beginning of a new administration. After a quite positive campaign and election in which our mayor won with about 70% of the vote. That allowed us to have a very aggressive push in Congress to build very robust attributions that actually make it possible for us to have real teeth when we deal with other agencies. So when we are talking about making a procedure digital, when we're talking about building a digital service, when we go to a different agency, it's not really about goodwill. It's about that we have the attribution and we're actually giving them instructions in terms of what they have to do, which I think is one of the very different parts of what happens around the world when you talk about digital innovation labs, in which their job is maybe sometimes harder because they have to negotiate a lot. Maybe the responsible agency doesn't want to do it, or it's not part of their immediate priorities. That's kind of different here in Mexico City. It doesn't mean that we really impose a reality on other agencies, because all the services that we do have to be built based on the needs of users, both citizens, but also the public servants that provide those services. But it also enables us to actually have a much more robust legal mandate, and believe me, it makes all the difference. I've been part of different digital authorities at the national level when we didn't have that authority, and really it makes our job much easier and the capacity to implement change at scale much simpler. And that also has to be dealing that, and this is the last thing I want to say before closing up, because I think I'm nearing those 7 minutes that we have allocated. But it's not only about that legal mandate in terms of strategy, but also about operations. So one of the things that we did here in Mexico City is that our agency has a mandate to operate all technological infrastructure that the city manages as kind of a CTO agency within the city. It enables us to supervise all the technology procedures and procurement process within Mexico City to ensure that all happens within the same general strategy and agenda with unified resources and unified uh, methods and also unified technology. And on a third level, which is very important for us, the core of what we do as a digital entity has to do with citizen services. And we have also managed to include in the law that gives us existence the mandate not only to have the digital part, but also the administrative part of simplifying those procedures. Because we believe that if we want to simplify and digitize, we must not only look at the digital part, we have to look at the process as a whole and as a comprehensive strategy in which we simplify to digitize, not digitize things that may not be simplified at a particular moment. So in a nutshell, that's what we do at the digital agency. I believe that it provides a good roadmap for other agencies around the world and local governments to actually get the idea, or at least learn from what we have learned, that it is important to understand that digital authorities within cities have to have a special mandate and a good authority that is similar to other departments and not be seen as kind of a satellite, as a lab, as something that is outside of the day-to-day and the scale that requires of managing a city or a municipality.
Great. Thanks, Eduardo. I see folks entering questions in the chat. So what I'm going to do is we will definitely refer to those at the end. I want to make sure we give all of our speakers, I think, ample time to talk. There's some interesting chat questions there, Eduardo, if you want to take a look, and we can address those, I think, at the end during the Q&A. I'll sort of flash to the next couple of slides. You can see this is a nice picture. We just had a visit there, although, Eduardo, you're oddly missing from this picture. But
maybe I took it because, yeah, I was definitely there.
Totally right. One other thing I don't know if you could speak to just a little bit. These were, some of the things that I felt like were so unique about your agency in particular, around building trust, increasing access, and reducing corruption, and then just digitizing and streamlining. I think like one of the most impressive things that we saw on the ground while we were there is just the amount of vital records and things that you're actually digitizing. I don't know if you want to talk about how that legislation is actually enabling you to achieve these priorities.
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks so much for bringing into that slide. I forgot to continue going with the deck. So one of the core parts about the digital strategy that we have implemented in Mexico City is that we cannot think of digitization as an island. There's a core number of components that need to happen for digitization to be actually efficient in improving citizens' lives. The first one has to do with increasing access to those digital services. One of the things that really stresses me out as somebody that has been working in digital government for a while has to do with building digital services that are only accessible by those better off, thereby creating bigger gaps in terms of inequality, in which people have really easy access to services if they're connected, but then you leave those behind that have usually been left behind. So one of the mandates that we have here in Mexico City as an agency has to do with also the connectivity mandate for the city, in terms of building networks for providing last mile access to all people within Mexico City. And in that regard, we have become the most connected city in terms of free Wi-Fi spots. We have about 35,000 points. That makes us the city with the most free access points in the world that are provided by a public government. In a second level, we also have a mandate to digitize a lot of services that have to do with the day-to-day activities that most citizens within Mexico City have to go through. Maybe the most important one has to do with vital records, which enable pretty much any other service, digital or not, to happen for citizens. How we get registered at birth, how we get registered when we marry, and how we get registered when we die. One of the things that differentiates us from other digital innovation agencies is that, fortunately, our mandate instructs us to go into those very hardcore services. So instead of thinking of very, last mile services that might be for a niche audience, we are trying to emphasize that our reach has to go with scale. So we have been trying to digitize, and not only trying, but one of our core projects has been with digitizing and creating digital identities of more than 2.9 million citizens and digital records of upwards of 30 million people. And this all has to do with closing the loop in which most interactions within government and citizens in Mexico, and I think around the world, presently are still part of face-to-face interaction between public servants and citizens. And at least in the case of Mexico, and I think that it's something prevalent in Latin America and other parts of the world, that opens space for a lot of discretionality and spaces for corruption. So one of the biggest mandates that we have has to do with digitizing so that we reduce the discretionality that public servants do to provide a service and therefore reduce corruption opportunity areas. So that's kind of what we build. And what we hope to do is build digital services in which we can actually create a circle of trust in which we provide a service, protect that data, and continue for those people to know that they can access to other services. So far, more than 4 million people in Mexico City have access to platforms and digital services that we have designed within Mexico City government and this agency. I'm not talking about just 4 million interactions, but 4 million unique citizens out of 9.2 million inhabitants that we have here in the city.
Great. Thanks so much, Eduardo. And then next, we're going to talk about a policy around ensuring the consistent use of digital tools. I see we've got some Oaklander folks, I think, in the audience. One of the things that I'm going to highlight, I think, from my own work that is probably unique. It's really difficult. I am a recovering bureaucrat by way of the city of Oakland and the city of San Francisco. And I think one of the challenges that we had is doing any sort of like formal legislation. So one mechanism that we used to enact change is really using internal facing memorandums. And so here around engagement tools and particularly social media, we used internal facing memorandums that were usually executed and signed off by a lead operational official. In the case of the city of Oakland, that would be a city manager or city administrator who's overseeing the operations of the city to direct particular work. And in my case, we really established the city's first digital engagement social media policy. And this was really intended to focus on three things. You can see informing and engaging, really highlighting and enhancing more rapid response, and directing public to specific digital assets that we would agree upon. The thing that I think is more unique about this particular lever and mechanism to sort of move forward the city's social media is really the idea that we actually had an internal memorandum that established the sort of overarching authority to a standard operating procedure that was nimble and changing, since the technology was constantly changing, since we would often have to pivot. And so what would get often updated is the actual standard operating procedure itself, whereas the sort of memorandum that would not take quite as long as Eduardo's legislation, but less time to actually like implement, but more difficult to change, could be actually adhered to while city staff could use and leverage the flexibility of actually changing the internal operation. So that could be what social media platforms we use, what platforms are used to sort of manage those social media interactions, the way in which and the frequency at which we would decide or could respond could be dictated within a policy and could be reviewed by a specific subset of individuals within the organization. And so that operational procedure allowed for a variety or a wide lens of flexibility in terms of execution, while still addressing some authority within the organization about who's actually making decisions about which way the policy would move. I see people are liking recovering bureaucrat. It's an ever true statement. And then next, I think one of the things that is just so interesting is a lot of people in the digital space are often talking about delivering equitable services and accessibility, since it's such a core part of building digital services. I really wanted to highlight some of the work that the city of Amsterdam is doing to use technology to make the city more accessible and ensuring digital tools to meet accessibility standards. Both those standards that many of us are familiar with, whether that's with CAG to a certain compliance level, but also those analog things that are in real life. And I'll highlight that briefly. And Bruno, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, about the partnership with World Enabled.
Yeah, I can jump in really quick. So I'm not directly involved in this initiative, but this is also taking place in our innovation department. And it's fun, like when you think about AI, and a lot of people think about robots, or even like on social media and everything that's going on in the background. But actually, it's fine to see how AI can also contribute to the real life of citizens. And in this case, there's an algorithm that was developed to identify barriers to pedestrians or cyclists out of the images from the city, like on a street view. And then you can identify and map them up so we can know how much accessible it is to everyone. So yeah, it's definitely a very, very nice partnership with this institute, World Enabled. And I think that's a nice example on how to use AI for in the public sector also to improve people's lives.
Great, thanks, Bruno. I also wanted to highlight an example that I touched on a little bit, but have really great colleagues that I think spearheaded this in San Francisco. They recently had a digital accessibility and inclusion standard approved in November 2021, also led by the city's digital services team, that had more to do with the city's digital services that were online. So these are two examples of things that can happen, sort of like impact in real life, actual accessibility, analog accessibility, if you will, meeting digital accessibility, as well as those things that are happening purely online. And then finally, I think that one of the other things, well, not finally, we've got two other topics, but one of interest is this idea where policy and governance, sort of the enacted, voted upon legislation meets actual practice, and that is in the field of open data. And here we have my colleague Tiffany, who I think can speak to that for a few minutes.
Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. So one thing that is really key is really focusing on, as I say, going back to the foundations, really focusing on management and use of data. In other words, how do you really make data available, actionable, and most certainly secure? I am a firm believer that everyone is a data steward, whether you're a high-level key decision maker on the front lines using a tech tool to input data into a system, or a resident receiving or using data to make a key decision in your day-to-day life. Everyone uses data in some way, and everyone uses tools to really give and receive pertinent information. And because everyone is a data steward, there really has to be a governing body to be able to ensure that there are standards, policies, and protocols in place to ensure that, again, all government data is available, actionable, and certainly secure. And through that, we have seen essentially data governance has been the exercise of authority and control over the management of data assets. And this is a hybrid approach, really focusing on both policy and process, where data governance really defines specific roles and responsibilities, creating a formal body or committee that really engages with the question of who is going to be making decisions and with what process. Data governance helps develop specific policies around addressing some key issues or challenges that I'm certainly sure that once I go through the list, a lot of folks have been through. Whether there is poor data management quality, just no data standards or data collection protocols in place. We're talking about increasing access to data, not only internally, but also externally, but also how do you actually do that? What are the specific protocols or standards or policies that your organization or your city has in place to do that, to really reduce those data silos? And then ultimately, how is data being really effectively used in strategic decision making? And then how you're actually working with information systems that might have been poorly managed or implemented, particularly on the onset when we're talking about what is the best tech tool to include into your program. And being in the field of open data for about a decade now, I really have seen a rise of formal data governance committees being established to really address this challenge. Open data and the need to share data externally really showcase the need to provide formal governance policies, not only to achieve the purposes of open data requirements, but also to sustain and document processes that extend a longer period, especially if you are moving into your digital data practices. It really helps select the appropriate development of tech solutions, improve balance of security, privacy with transparency and accountability, widen internal access across departments, but with also external partners, improve analytics, publish self-serve data to address resident questions and needs, and really laying a foundation for better service delivery within city governments. One key example that I do am really proud of is the city of Baltimore, next slide, has been really showcasing how data governance has been formalized. It's really the great work that the city of Baltimore has been doing under Mayor Brandon Scott, Chief Administrative Officer Christopher Shorter, and Chief Data Officer Justin Elsas. The city of Baltimore has been in the business of using data and evidence to inform decision-making for about 20 years or so. Most notably with its performance management program called CityStat, and then sharing data with the public through its open data portal for about almost 8 years now. And in that time, the city has really evolved in its practices, moving more into a digital space, but really needed to focus on how can they really address some key challenges, such as reducing silos internally by leveraging an existing open data portal, the need to set data standards for disaggregating data by demographics, addressing privacy, security, and confidentiality concerns, and really making some key decisions to evolve into their digital practice. So for the past 5 years or so, GovX has been a key partner with the city, really working with them to advance their practices, where we assisted them in creating a cross-departmental data governance collective, really focusing on how do we move away from just this internal group, really assessing where their practices are across citywide, and how do we get some external partners a part of this data governance collective that we like to call, that really showcases including an equity lens into the process as well. The city's mission for data governance is really to best be able to better serve residents in the community by improving the quality of life through equitable, ethical, and effective use of data in the tech tools that they're providing. They do this in a way that they're not just focusing on what the protocols are that are set in place, but making sure that there are standards, but they're also focusing on training and educating. I think this is really key when we're talking about foundational data governance practices, is how are you educating your internal staff to best be able to use tech tools and how to be able to be good stewards of data, but also taking that outside of government into residents and those external stakeholders who are really true champions and using this work on a day-to-day basis. The city of Baltimore has really set a foundation, and I'm just really glad and really proud of the work that Justin Elsas has been doing in his role in the past year or so since they've had data governance to move this work forward and move into more digital space.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. And we'll move over to the final and fifth is informing policy and decision making. So how do we use tools to inform what will happen in the future, which I think the city of Amsterdam has a lock potentially on thinking about the future in such an interesting and sophisticated way. And it's why we've invited Bruno here. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Mylene. Yes, definitely. So the thing is, you're using digital tools to better inform future policy also. And there's a thing that's a lot of those tools, a lot of those methods are already used in the private sector or in the industry for years and years. And then it takes some time for them to actually get into the government. And that's a little bit what we're also trying to do, see what's going up there. So one of the things that we try to do in Amsterdam is to anticipate to changes in society, a change of new technologies. So we have people dedicated just to research those new technologies going on and to see if there's any value that could be added to citizens, or if we could use it in any way to make life better for citizens. And however, we do have an approach that favors the public stack, and I'll just explain it really quick. So when you have an app in your phone, for example, you have your interface, and then you have a very nice design and visual to use your app, for example. But the thing is that under this application, there are layers and layers and layers of things. And I don't mean here only technical or back-end things, but there are also a business model. So for example, if you're using something for free, there's a high chance that you are the product. So there's a business model behind it. So there's a source code behind it that can be commercial or that could be owned by someone. So there's a lot of things under layers in this application of this new technology. And what we favor is the public stack. And that means if you develop an application or a new technology in the context of government, then you have here, and the citizen can use it, or in the cell phone, a laptop, or I mean, it's a new technology. The thing is that we want to favor the public stack, so an open code, an open source code, clear rules. So okay, this is the data we're getting. This is how we're going to use our data. This is how maybe that there's also a say. Okay, this is the kind of data I want to share. I don't want to share that. So just to make it clear and transparent, so citizens can make a choice on whether they can use it, they want to use it or not, for example. And then maybe in the next slide, we can see a little bit of our focus in the next slide. So we're working in a specific area of Amsterdam in the scope of the Bloomberg I-Team project. So we chose the Southoost neighborhood, which is in the southeast of Amsterdam. And that's mainly an immigrant neighborhood. And we have a lot of different nationalities and different cultures, and also big social housing projects that since the 1970s, 80s have been developed there. So there are very specific challenges, I would say, for urban management. Also a lot going on, a lot of nice opportunities for development there. And we want to use digital urban planning to approach those problems. And it's mainly using digital tools, new digital tools, and even develop new digital tools to address urban planning issues. So mobility, housing shortage, how do you manage public space? So that's our approach on trying to bring to the municipality these new technologies and even like develop also in our city in order to address those issues. And then some lessons that we learned, then you can see the next slide, some lessons that we learned in this process is mainly to start with a full understanding of the current policies. So especially for us as an I team, so it's a new team and a new approach. So, but it's very, very important to know what's already going on and what all the departments are doing, and also not only the municipality, but also what are the movements, what's going on in the civil society, and what's the communities already organizing, and what's going on. I found it very, very important. And in this case, we have Master Plan Southoost, which is an initiative that approaches specific topics to improve quality of life in the neighborhood. And we're very lucky to have them doing that amazing job there. The second is to take advantage of existing tools within city government. And in this case, we have 3D Amsterdam that's a 3D viewer, and it's being developed for years. And the thing is that it's very nice. Okay, let's develop a new tool. Okay, no, that's not really the issue. Want to solve a problem? Let's see what we have already in terms of tools, in terms of systems. So we don't have like 10 platforms, 5 systems, 2, 3 viewers, 10 websites. So just try to check really what's up there and if we can use it as much as possible in our solution. And third, we are learning to, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, could you explain a little bit about what the 3D Amsterdam project actually like does, or what you think it might do, what you're experimenting with? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So 3D Amsterdam is it's a viewer, it's an interface to access 3D data, and it's an open source project that's being developed in cooperation with Utrecht and Rotterdam also now. And the thing is, so it's a totally open source. You can find it on GitHub also. If you type it 3D Amsterdam GitHub, you have the code. And it's pretty much it's a viewer based on a game engine that provides realistic insights in 3D in the city. So we have all the buildings of the city in 3D. And now, and then we plan to use it as a viewer to whatever data we use and whatever tool we choose to develop. We're actually thinking on using 3D Amsterdam to convey this data to citizens mainly, and also to other stakeholders. Because in 3D, when we're talking about urban planning or urban design or urban issues, it's always easier to see it in 3D. Always easier. Mainly for us, for me as an urban planner, I work with maps for so many years, but it's actually not so straightforward. So we're planning to use 3D Amsterdam as a sort of our interface of our application or our solution or whatever solution we offer, but to use this very nice open source platform that it's available. And also you can also access online. It's 3d.amsterdam.nl. And yeah, it's actually open. You can see Amsterdam 3D and you can try some scenarios and download 3D data and yeah, do some nice stuff.
Cool, thanks, Bruno. And oh, go ahead.
I just really quick, our last point, the last lesson is to really include all stakeholders in all phases of design and implementation of this new digital tool. So all the users and also the other departments, and also people, not only technical people or not only developers, but also service designers and people with different backgrounds. I think that's
great. Thanks, Bruno. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did want to highlight. I think, am I correct in saying you might be the world's first digital urban planner in a city?
Yeah, in the city, yeah. I don't know, but yeah, trying to jump into bring in the urban planning field and also the digital solutions, or maybe urban technologists. There are some urban technologists out there that I have already seen. But definitely it's quite an innovative position that I recommend our cities to have.
Very, very cool. Well, before we jump to Q&A, so I'll remind folks, as you have questions, please enter them in the chat. I think one of the things that I wanted to say is while the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, we're very, very focused on public innovation in cities. I personally feel, I often say this, I think, to people, is that I think cities are so important because they manage the most intimate parts of our lives. You can't get away from interfacing with city government when you're walking down the street or being lit, experiencing lights above you or trees or anything else, or vaccines or education. It is really the day-to-day part of our lives that city government oversees, manages, and administers. So to me, it feels very personal and important. And so I'm really glad to be working with these esteemed colleagues on making all of our cities, our communities, and our world better. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and shift to the question and answer period of our discussion. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes for that, I believe, if I'm correct. One of the first questions, I think this was actually intended for Eduardo, but I'll also just address it to the rest of the panel because I think it's universally applicable. Was the initiative spearheaded by the new mayor, or did your team convince the new mayor to push it forward? So maybe we can kick it off with Eduardo, but I'm curious to hear from folks about the role of the mayor in each of these processes. So Eduardo, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure thing. So that's a really good question, and I think I spoke to Mei-Ling about this a few months ago. So Mexico City is very particular in terms of having a very, very long transition period. The mayor got elected in June. We came into government in December. And that gave us a very large space of time to actually tinker with the mayor's original idea. So when she first tasked us with building the agency, it was much more limited in its scope. And then as she was building a policy agenda for the whole city, not only for the digital part, but really as a government agenda, she kind of started seeing loops in which she could kind of embed us to make those policy agendas become a reality. And there was a very long conversation in which we went from pretty much being based only around open government all the way to having a much more digital operation mandate. And it also gave us another part that is very important. It gave us time to learn during that transition period in terms of what the previous administration had been doing, and trying not to throw everything out the window, but more on trying to consolidate based on knowing what outgoing public servants were kind of telling us as their challenges, as their learnings, and so forth. But basically, she kind of built the idea that she wanted a digital agency, and then the group that she tasked with building that digital agency, we were responsible with kind of going back to her and trying to get more ambitious targets as well. And then, to be quite honest, we ended up having more responsibilities that we thought we were going to have based on this very aggressive law that I mentioned. So it was a very dynamic conversation. It wasn't really built on a static idea, but it was kind of a process.
Great. Thanks so much. And I think that, we are constantly talking about the role of the mayor in our work, and it's very clear that the role of the mayor is very important. And I think that from city to city, the role of the mayor often shifts in terms of what they're responsible for, what kinds of decisions they can make, and what kind of levers they can pull, and how we might use these policies at a municipal level. Tiffany and Bruno, I don't know if you have any thoughts about the role of the mayor in each of your initiatives.
Sure. So in the city of Baltimore, I can certainly say that I personally have also been advocating for governance, especially in the work that we've been doing with the city for the past 5 years. I will say that, as new challenges arise and we were called to come in to assist, particularly ransomware, helping to develop or think through or brainstorm new ways that the cities can advance their practices. Governance was certainly the key to that based on the challenges that was just in the city. And so, when Mayor Scott came on board, it was a no-brainer to really focus on this and really have this as a policy, and creating this formalized governance group to really focus on and being really intentional about how we are, focusing and establishing formalized policies around how this city is actually managing and using data, not just internally, but also externally with residents. And also, just to note, when Mayor Brandon Scott was a city council member, he was the lead in passing the Open Data Initiative, the act here in the city of Baltimore. And so it was certainly a no-brainer once he came on board that this was something that he would be focusing on and embedding this into his day-to-day operations, and really changing the culture of when we say city government employees using data and how residents are actually interacting with it, not just with the digital tools, but how we're just overall just being good stewards of data.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. Bruno?
Yeah, I can jump in really quickly. So in the Netherlands, we have kind of a different management style for governance style for the city. So it's kind of a more parliamentary system. But we do have a lot of contact with the mayor. We had with the mayor some weeks ago, and she's always Mayor Femke Halsema. She's always up to date with the development. She's always bringing input, and also we are taking care of engaging also the other stakeholders. So, for example, the local mayor. So we have also strong local mayors in the parts of the city. So we're also engaging with Tanya Yadanansin, which is stadsdeelvoorzitter. And I'm definitely bringing input, and I think it's also important for the success of the project that everyone is updated and also taking and promoting the project internally and externally.
Great, thanks so much, Bruno. I would tend to agree with that. I think that in working with mayors, for me, I think the most important part, even whether that policy is an internal memorandum to city staff or if that is an agreed upon legislation, it is really critically important, I think, for them to align with the mayor's priorities. And I think ultimately those are the things that drive that policy forward. If it doesn't align with the mayor's priorities, there's really no way of moving those things forward. And really those demonstrable priorities. So I think that is really what allows for that movement. I think a second question we have in the chat is also for Eduardo. It's really a quick question about if Mexico City, if the agency you're with is really, municipal or national, but I think maybe you could talk a little bit about the structure of Mexico City, I think, just to inform folks, and maybe some of us could do some briefing too about how our own cities are structured.
Yeah, sure thing. So Mexico City is a very particular place. Mexico has the national government, state level governments. We have 32 states, and then we have 2,400 48 municipalities. But Mexico City is the only place in which we kind of combine a state and a municipality. So we have actually the attributions of both levels of government, which makes it much more fun for us in terms of the services that we provide. We provide services that go across two different levels of government, and that makes our relationship to citizens much more tangible. And also, a lot of the strategies that we do can be integrated vertically because we have those two others of government within our attributions. Additionally, Mexico City, as many other metropolises around the world, is a particular case because we have 9.2 million citizens, but really day to day, we have about 17 million people that come into Mexico City and its borders, and about 23 million people that live within the metro area that recurrently use Mexico City services as their own. So it's kind of a really intense place, but it also makes it it's a very motivating place because we can reach with very simple digital services tremendous scales of millions and millions of citizens.
Great. Thanks, Eduardo. And I'm actually going to run through because I've just seen we've got questions in the chat and the Q&A, so we have lots of questions. So I'm going to run through them. I think our next question here is, what are some examples of how digital tools have helped the city of Amsterdam, so over to Bruno, engage residents in ways they couldn't or didn't before?
Sure. Yeah, so we have different tools. We have a platform where people can propose projects. Also, it's kind of the neighborhood budget, so people can propose projects, can be assessed there. And in case of 3D Amsterdam, it's been developed in the last 2 years. So it's now starting. They're starting with use cases in the field of participation. But for example, we could have the new projects uploaded also to 3D Amsterdam so people can see it in a better way. Or, for example, you can see the impact of the sun or the shadow of the new development in your house. So you can actually use this 3D capability to improve the way you get access to this information. Or, for example, to calculate how much solar energy you can produce on the roofs of a specific place, for example. But yeah, definitely a lot of digital services being offered also through the Digi ID, which is and this is for the whole of the Netherlands. And then you actually can do pretty much everything you need from the government online using this certification app, and then go into the government application. And then it's more of the federal government level, but it's also integrated with the same ID. You go and you also access services from the municipalities.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to toggle over. I'm taking another question from Q&A. I'm going to do the shortened version of this question, but if our panelists can look over at Q&A, there's probably a longer version of this question, which is, what have your cities done around creating APIs for other organizations to innovate on? And I would say it sounds like maybe generally, what are things that we're all doing to ensure that other cities can leverage this work?
If I could just comment really quick about how 3D Amsterdam has been developed with other municipalities, and it's being built up in a way that actually you could build 3D Gouda of 3D Zwolle of any other city in the Netherlands in 1 hour, or in a workshop session. You can just build up this application using the nationally available data. So you just and I also agree it's very important to have room for collaboration with other municipalities while developing your own applications, because many times they share the same issue, sometimes not, but sometimes it can be useful.
Great. Tiffany or Eduardo, any?
I can jump in real quick. So we have built a few real-time APIs through our open data systems. Most of them are right now used not very intensively. But one of the things that I'm very excited about, most of what we have developed in terms of digital government in Mexico City has to do with building a digital identity for Mexican citizens, for Mexican city citizens. We call it Llave CDMX, Key Mexico City Key. It's a single sign-on certificate that we have built. We have about 4 million users that have enrolled into that in the last 4 years. For more hardcore things, we actually have a PKI certificate for digital authentication based on that signature. But the important thing about this is we have built about 50 digital services to that. We have connected another 20 that were from legacy systems, and we have about 40 to 60 million digital transactions in each one of those every year. Most of them are trusted sources, things that government can authenticate for outside providers, from license plate registrations to permitting to different things. One of the things that we see as the last mile reach for digital identity here in Mexico City is offering third parties those trusted sources of information for validation for other third-party users. So generating an ecosystem of different APIs so that different applications and businesses can leverage some of the trusted sources that we have within Mexico City government to build third-party applications, or just really use us as a source of confident records for authenticating information that citizens might provide for third-party services. That's still kind of in the works. We have a development team that actually is working on that right now, but it's still maybe like a year away from being developed into production.
Great. Tiffany, go ahead.
Now, I just want to quickly add that at GovX, we create peer-to-peer networking groups to really be able to share information, particularly based on the focus area, priority area, or just challenge area. And so, we encourage everyone to share that information, particularly with the city of Baltimore, has an entire website really dedicated to this. And then also the chief data officer is really, really interested in networking with a lot of folks. So I can say if you want to see who's in our network, certainly reach out to us, but we do build that collective as we do our work with one-to-one city engagements.
And I think on that note, there was another question in the chat about planned efforts to partner with other cities and agencies to share knowledge, tools, capacity to benefit or apply lessons learned in each of our cities. I think this is one of the purposes of this panel. So we're starting here. Two, the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, in addition to some of the resources that Tiffany has mentioned at our sister center, our center is also offering a network. We are also hosting this digital innovation teams program in which Eduardo and Bruno are a part of, to collaborate with cities, to develop a cohort model, to really learn from each other, to have these discussions, to really identify what are the things that can be leveraged and replicated in different cities around the world. Bruno, I don't know if there's anything you did touched on 3D Amsterdam. Eduardo had touched on some of the digital ID items, and Tiffany, GovX. Anything else that we think we missed in terms of collaboration? I also heard the plug of GitHub, I think, earlier in the conversation. So I think that's another good place to go, I think, for folks who've been there.
In terms of collaboration here in Mexico, I don't know if I mentioned this to you mainly the Bloomberg team that came here a few weeks ago, but the most developed state within Mexico in many regards. And many of the problems that we have with the public problems that states face are very common across states in Mexico. So we have so far signed collaboration agreements with 8 different states out of the 32 states in Mexico for us to transfer technology to them in 2 regards. The first one has to do with software of most of the applications that we have developed, both or single sign-on, but also value-added applications such as digital driver's license is probably the most used. We have about 1 million that we have created here in Mexico City since we launched that. And on a second level, we actually manage a robust number of data centers, of data processing centers that the city manages. And for very small municipalities and smaller states with different levels of tech maturity, we actually offer kind of a government cloud that we actually manage from Mexico City government. So we have been investing in that heavily based on knowing that the problems that we face as a city are problems that pretty much all cities across Mexico share and probably across the region.
Great, thanks, Eduardo. And I also will note that your team has even a specific role devoted to international and interstate relations to help manage that program, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that is true.
So that's a very intentional part, I think, of your team's strategy, which I think is fantastic. And not every city has quite yet, but maybe we should consider. I think a couple of things. We've got about 4 minutes left, so we probably have time for one more question. We have tons of questions in the chat that we're not going to get to. So thanks everyone for your patience. I'll give you some contact information to follow up on. One of the final questions are about asking about keeping community members engaged in the process of communicating ideas with the city to inform policy. I'll say this, I'll read out loud here. It says, I often hear neighbors who hold back great ideas because they feel like the city doesn't acknowledge and promote citizens. And so we've got all these great policies, and great question here about how we have community members engaged or informing them. Anybody want to kick it off? I know we only have a few minutes left, so maybe we can.
I can mention maybe really quick the efforts of Master Plan Southoost in Amsterdam, because also there was the problem of the pandemic. So during the participation process, we have this whole situation, and they needed to change their plans. But the good thing is that there was already a well-established connection with local organizations, and they actually got to hold a participation process. But I think in general, also not only for this project, but in general, I also worked in participation projects in other opportunities. I think it's always about what you bring to the where you are at your project, what the steps you're taking, why are you grabbing this input at this point, what are you going to do, use it, and kind of build a relationship of trust. And it takes some time also. So I think it's all about building trust that the citizen can be open with the government, can be open in that participation process, and that everything is going to be transparent, and then kind of end up getting some nice output.
Great. Anybody else have anything to quickly add before we close?
I'll just add that for governance, one thing that I've seen be done just really well is in the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan, where for them, open data was really a bottom-up approach. Really, you see that as a top-down approach, especially when you're focusing on governance. But in that city, there was a need for government data, and nonprofit and local community organizations were really heavily reliant on that. And so they were really pushing for open data and governance policies, and they actually created a hybrid approach to their governance body, where it's not just internal stakeholders, but also resident stakeholders to help inform the policy that's being made and creating those standards and policies. So there is work that's being done when we're talking about engaging the community and at least the governance structures and policy making, because it's not just internal staffers who are using the data, but also resident stakeholders and nonprofit leaders who are really reliant on government data and the tools that are being developed by government organizations.
Thanks, Tiffany. Yeah, and I would say lastly, I think my experience even in an internal policy with regards to digital engagement, I think some of that, the impetus after many conversation and potentially like years of discussing what a policy and procedure could look like, was really driven by the fact that community members were pounding on our door and insisting on particular outcomes and response. That was enabled us to actually like push that forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the panel. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists again. I will go ahead and share my screen, I think, one more time to share some contact information with you, hopefully, or potentially not. Oh, there we go. And so if you'd like to keep in touch with us, feel free to email or to follow us on Twitter. And then if you'd like to reach out to any of our esteemed panelists for any questions that we didn't get to in the chat or the Q&A, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to discuss further. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all of you coming.